and welcome to this episode of Bake It Up a Notch. I am so excited for this episode because we are talking all things equipment. This request came directly from you guys. You've been asking in the comments my favorite pans, my favorite tools, and we're finally giving it to you here in this episode. Every single piece of equipment we show in this episode is linked in the video description below, so head down there if you're looking for recommendations. Also in this episode, we have a very special guest.
Hi, I'm Abina, and I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite baking tools and tips.
But first, let's head to one of my favorite kitchen supply stores, Caracas and Bake Deco in Brooklyn. If you love Bake It Up a Notch, please do me a favor and click like and subscribe so you can be made aware of all our new episodes as they become available. All right, let's get baking. Today, we are in one of my favorite places in all of the city. We are at Caracas and Bake Deco here in Brooklyn. This store has absolutely everything you need and then some to be a great baker. So let's take a quick tour around and I'm gonna show you what all we can find in this amazing place. Let's see. That's like a full body workout sift. These are flexible silicone molds and they are so much fun because they are really easy to use. They're really easy to unmold, they're heat safe, so you can use them for a lot of different things. There's even classic baking shapes like madeleines up here. So some of these could be almost like regular baking pans, but it's great to have such a variety of shapes. Let's see, what else do we have over here? Oh, silicone baking mats. This is cool because a lot of companies like Silpat make baking mats for specific purposes. So like here, this is meant for macaron. So you can use these as a guide. And you know, in our macaron episode, we traced circles onto parchment paper. So if you make a lot of macarons, that's pretty cool. Oh, see, yes, I need one of those. This is gonna be an expensive trip for me. Okay, let's talk here about gel food coloring. I've mentioned a lot on Bake It Up a Notch that gel food coloring is my favorite for a lot of different uses. I really love Chef Master or AmeriColor, which is this brand. These are both two really good brands of gel food coloring, and we also got some great advice on powdered colors from one of the folks who works here, but you just have to be careful that you're using the right powder for the job. You've seen in lots of episodes of Bake It Up a Notch that I love pastry bags. They make pastry bags in cloth, polyurethane, and disposable ones just made out of clear plastic. I often use those disposable kind, but if you want something less wasteful, these reusable bags are a great way to go. My recommended size is 12 or 14 inches for the average person at home. Sifters like these are great for aerating your ingredients, but also for straining things like to get seeds out of raspberry jam, all kinds of stuff. I like to have a set. I use this small kind sometimes for sifting really small quantities of cocoa when I'm making a little batch of something, and then these two bigger ones for bigger jobs like straining jams or puddings. I had so much fun at Caracas and Bake Deco taking a tour around. If you like any of the things that you've seen in this tour, be sure to check them out at bakedeco.com. But for now, I'm gonna head back to the Food 52 studios and show you my 3 levels of baking tools that I think you should know about. Let's go. Okay, we're back in the studio. Now we're gonna jump into our budding baker kit and recipe. So the first things first, obviously, there's a lot of great equipment out there, and equipment is a really personal choice. Just because somebody recommends something to you, you might find that it doesn't suit your hand quite right, or you don't like the weight of it. There are all sorts of things like that. But the idea of these kits that we've created is just to show you what I think are necessities for different levels of baking. And we're gonna start with the budding baker. Maybe you're just dipping your toe in baking, or maybe you aren't sure that you wanna invest too much money or anything like that. This is a great place to start. These are definitely the tools that are gonna allow you to mix things by hand, just really the most simple stuff. So to start, we're gonna make a pumpkin streusel loaf using some of our budding baker equipment. And the first thing to know about the budding baker equipment, we're gonna start with the most important thing that everybody should have, no matter your baking level, a scale. you're gonna notice that even in this budding baker category, there are no measuring cups, none, because I don't like measuring cups, guys. I like scales. I like them a whole lot. Actually, the cost of the average scale is going to be really similar to a nice set of reliable measuring cups. But reliable measuring cups is a bit of an oxymoron. Every brand is slightly different. There's a reason that measuring by volume is not as accurate as measuring by weight. So this is my favorite scale. I have several of these in my house because they're small, they don't take up a lot of room, they would fit in a drawer. So I've already scaled out the rest of my ingredients, and I just did the last thing was my oil here on my scale. So now we're gonna start mixing. The other thing you're not going to see in the budding baker section is any kind of electric mixer, because I wanna point out that there are so many amazing things you can bake using your hands, using hand tools. So we're gonna move on to those electric mixers a little bit later. And for now, for you budding bakers, don't think you can't start baking without making a big investment like that.
I'm convinced a kitchen really isn't a kitchen until you have a bench scraper. It may look like such a simple object, but it has such practical uses. For instance, you can scrape up pie dough once you're done rolling it out. You can use it to measure, or you can use it to scoop things from your cutting board into your bowl. Definitely something that I would recommend having.
So into my oil, I'm going to add first I'm gonna add some melted butter. A lot of quick bread recipes use oil only, but I like to use a mixture of oil and melted butter because it gives a little bit of that like cakey richness into the mix. To that, we're going to add our sugars. Then we're gonna I've got brown sugar and I also have granulated sugar. A reminder that all of these recipes are down below in our video description. So you can check out all the pertinent info for those recipes there. And I'm just gonna start using my whisk to mix this to combine. Now, the most important thing about mixing by hand is just to make sure that you're doing it sufficiently. You know, if you have used an electric mixer for a long time, it can be easy to think that everything just takes a minute or so. But in this case, kind of imitating the creaming action, but with a whisk, just to combine these ingredients, we just wanna make sure that we really do give it a good mix to combine. So obviously a whisk is something really important that a baker needs. And the other cool thing about a whisk is that it can also kind of play the role of a sifter. When you're mixing your dry ingredients together, just a quick whisk is going to perform a similar aeration and, removing some of those lumps. Okay, let's add our eggs one at a time. And I'm using a glass mixing bowl here. I also love metal mixing bowls because they're really lightweight. The most important thing with mixing bowls for me is that they're heat safe because I use mixing bowls for lots of tasks that do involve heat. For more on the best mixing bowls, we're gonna throw it to my friend Abina.
What's a baker without bowls? I still remember the first day I got my Duralex Russian doll nesting bowls, and I really thought that I was officially beginning this exciting hobby. Mixing bowls are just the foundation to learning how to bake. They're really great for, measuring and doing your mise en place, which I'm a huge fan of. It's just a nice way to have all your ingredients laid out. But it's also really great to have a nice, even way to see how your ingredients are forming and coming together.
Once our eggs are incorporated, we can add our wet ingredients into this mixture. We've got our pumpkin, of course. We'll also add our sour cream and our vanilla. Now we're just gonna mix that in until it's well incorporated. Next, we're gonna start adding our dry ingredients. And while I don't recommend measuring cups, I do believe in measuring spoons. A lot of common home scales don't measure finite details to a very specific gram. So for smaller things like a quarter teaspoon, a half teaspoon, volume measure is still okay in my book. All right, I'm just gonna mix my dry ingredients together a little bit before I start. And this is actually an example of when you can use a whisk as a sifter. But it's just to also incorporate those dry ingredients together so that you don't have a pocket of spice once it gets into contact with those wet ingredients. All right, the dry ingredients are going in. And I usually start mixing with a whisk just because it makes it a little bit easier to incorporate. But eventually I'll switch to my silicone spatula, which is truly one of the most important tools for any budding baker. And I advise looking for spatulas that are all one piece like this. I like that the spatula and the ones we're recommending are all silicone. They're all heat safe. A lot of times spatulas have a separate head that comes off. That can just be a growing space for mildew where it comes into contact with the handle. Sometimes the handles aren't dishwasher safe. There's all kinds of things. I like this kind of spatula where it's heat safe, so I can throw it in the dishwasher or wash it by hand. I can use it in a pot, or I can use it to fold my ingredients together like I am now. All right, so after a few folds, just to make sure everything is uniform and homogeneous, we're ready to go into our loaf pan. Now, throughout these kits, I'm gonna recommend a few different pans that I think are great to have. In the budding baker kit, one of those pans is a loaf pan. So versatile, so useful. I recommend either an 8x4" loaf pan or a 9x5. In addition to loaf pans, the other pans I recommend for budding bakers are baking sheets, at least one, but preferably two. There's a lot of tasks where it's kind of annoying to wait for that sheet tray to cool down before you can scoop the next round of cookies, that sort of thing. I also recommend a good pie plate. My favorite pie plate, that's a great all-purpose one, retails at only about 15 bucks. So it's a really easy investment even for a budding baker. Another great pan for budding bakers is a square cake pan, either an 8x8" pan or a 9x9" pan. So that would be, 20 by 20 centimeters or 23 by 23 centimeters. Those square pans, one of the things that's really great about it, you can actually learn about this a lot in my friend Yossi's book, Snacking Cakes. All of her snacking cakes can be made in a 9x9 or in a round cake pan or in a loaf pan. There's a lot of swapping that can go on. So a 9x9 or an 8x8 is really kind of the go-to basic cake pan. You can make a lot of different things in it. Obviously brownies, lots of different desserts, sheet cakes, all sorts of things. So those are my recommendations for the budding baker kit pan-wise. So with that said, we're gonna go ahead and put our pumpkin batter into this pan. I've lined this pan with parchment paper. I used some nonstick spray and then I lined it with parchment paper. Parchment paper is so great for so many reasons. My favorite kind comes from King Arthur. They have it in both kind of a white version and also a natural version, and both are really wonderful. But the white one is especially, especially non-stick. So it's really a wonderful thing for so many different baking tasks. And in this case, it's gonna allow us to use a really, really moist cake batter and have no fear that we're gonna have any difficulty unmolding it, because we're gonna be able to just lift it right out of the pan using those like parchment handles on the sides. So this batter is a little bit thicker, so this is a great time to use one of my other favorite tools for budding bakers, a small offset spatula. This is almost any baker you talk to's favorite tool. Everybody loves these. They're so infinitely useful, and they just really give you a dexterity because of the angle. So that is one thing to look out for when you're shopping. That's what they mean when they say offset spatula. There are also flat spatulas that are very similar in size. You don't want a flat spatula necessarily. You want that offset, that angle, because it gives you the ability to like get into a pan just like this. So I always top my pumpkin bread with turbinado sugar, but this is a streusel loaf. So I'm saying that the turbinado sugar is optional, but I'm still gonna add it. Just a nice layer over the top. It adds like this crunch and a little extra sweetness. And then we'll crumble our streusel right over the top. This is another great example of something that I just mixed by hand in a little mixing bowl. So, there's a lot that you can do. And if you're looking for more recipes for the budding baker, maybe check out our basic cakes episode of Bake It Up a Notch. In that one, we basically didn't use any electric mixers, and there's a lot of fun recipes and yummy ones too. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and transfer this to the oven for its bake time. Inside the oven is one of the most important tools for a brand new baker. So many troubleshooting problems can be fixed by just making sure your oven is calibrated properly. For more on this, let's head back to Bake Deco. One of the most important things any baker needs before you get started is an oven thermometer. It's really common for home ovens to fall out of calibration. So having an oven thermometer is going to give you an accurate depiction of what the temperature actually is in your oven. If you find that your oven is consistently running 25 degrees too cold, you can always raise your oven temperature when you're baking. We're going to talk even more about oven thermometers and getting to know your oven in our next bite-size episode. Stay tuned. Our pumpkin streusel loaf is out of the oven. It cooled for a few minutes in the pan, but if you let something like this cool completely in the pan, it's actually going to become soggy on the bottom. So I want to unmold it to cool on a wire rack. Here's Abina with more on why we love them.
Not only am I obsessed with baking, but I'm obsessed with the science behind baking. A little fun fact is when your bakes come right out of the oven, they're actually still cooking. And so wire racks are really awesome because they allow you to slowly cool the bottom of your bakes to prevent soggy bottoms and get that perfect crisp, crunch, or crinkle that you're looking for. I think a perfect wire rack of this size is awesome. You just want to put your bakes right on top of it. And also, I think it's a great decorating tool. You can put a little bit of parchment paper on top, and once you're done, you can use that to put your cookies, brownies, or any other goodies that you've whipped up.
This next kit is for the baker on the rise, sort of like an intermediate level. For our baker on the rise, we're going to make a really yummy recipe, my jammy pie bars. This is a really yummy recipe that uses a streusel layer on the bottom, then jam in the middle, and pie dough on top for a really yummy bar cookie. We'll start by making the streusel base. I'm gonna put our flour into our mixing bowl and also our oats. We're gonna do some brown sugar. A little bit of baking powder. This is something that I do in my streusel to help it form different kinds of clumps. I love it. And some cinnamon. I'm just gonna use my hands, but of course you can use any of the hand tools that we just talked about in our budding baker kit as well. Perfect. All right, now we're gonna add some melted butter to this to make our streusel. Ooh, sometimes streusel is made with cold butter, sometimes it's made with room temperature butter, and sometimes it's made with melted butter. Really, all of them make an excellent streusel. But we can use, this is a great example of one time that we could use the dough cutter. Now, you typically use the dough cutter when you're using cold butter to help incorporate it, but in this case, since we are trying to get that streusel-y texture, it is another thing that's gonna help us form clumps without necessarily just stirring it to combine and forming one big mass. So a pastry cutter is also a great tool for anyone who doesn't have naturally cold hands like I do for making things like biscuits, pie dough, all of that. It's a really wonderful tool. And what it does is it cuts in the fat. That's why it's called a pastry cutter. So the pastry cutter is made up of these kind of blades attached to a handle, and you just kind of roll it through your mixture like this. All right, we're gonna go ahead and pour this into a 9x13 pan. I've lined this pan with parchment as well. I'm just gonna kind of crumble it in an even layer, then we'll press it into an even layer. Now a 9x13 pan is one of the next pans that I really recommend for the baker on the rise. We'll talk about a few other pans that you can add to your collection in this kit, but for now I'm just gonna press this into an even layer. And a streusel crust like this is honestly one of the easiest things that you can do. So even though we're on the baker on the rise, we're still keeping this a nice simple recipe to start, but then we're gonna add some, baker on the rise flair in the form of a lattice on top. This is actually the only time I would use a measuring cup, but only to press this in. I don't hate anything except measuring cups and also pie chains. Pie chains are the silliest invention. I hate you so much. How is something that weighs nothing supposed to weigh down a flaky crust? Tell me this. I don't understand. So now I'm gonna pour in some jam and spread it into a nice even layer. This is one of my favorite ways to kind of do pie in the winter when I don't have access to great fresh fruit. I like to use up jams that I made in the summer or jams that I scored at the farmer's market or a farm stand. It's like a great way to get a little of that taste of summer any time of year. And if you like to make your own jam like I do, you might enjoy one of the other items on our Baker on the Rise kit, an immersion blender.
The immersion blender. This shiny wand really is magic. There's nothing more exciting than going to the farmer's market, grabbing the freshest pint of cherries or strawberries and just whipping them up into a nice filling for those cookies or those jams or those pies, and just your immersion blender making that much easier for you. And a non-baking tip, I think they're also amazing for soups or any kind of stews that you're making in the winter as well. Definitely a huge investment.
Okay, I'm now enlisting the help of another tool. This is a larger offset spatula. These two sizes that you see, the small offset, which is about 4 inches long, and this size, which is about 8 inches long, 20 centimeters. These are the only two I really use, but this one is really great for icing larger surface areas like a cake, or in this case, I'm gonna use the larger size of the spatula to just help me get a really nice even coating of this jam on the crust. And because this is a streusel crust, it doesn't require any of that fussy par baking or anything like that. We can just go right on into the next step. This one is blackberry and plum preserves mixed together. All right, I'm gonna pop this in the fridge and grab some pie dough that I already made. It's been chilling. We're gonna use that to make lattice strips to top these bars. And of course, talk about the rest of our Baker on the Rise kit items. Next, we're gonna roll out the pie dough, and I have a few different tools I wanna talk about here. First, in front of me, I have a pastry mat. Now, I have to be honest, I don't always use a pastry mat just because I was not taught using one, but the pastry mat is a great tool to invest in, especially if you have trouble rolling out dough, because it's really, really non-stick. The other thing about a good pastry mat is it has some other information on here, like a couple of diameter guides, depending on the size of your pan. And of course, the 5-2 pastry mat even has my pie dough recipe printed right on it. So it's a great way to go. I also am gonna need a rolling pin. So the 5-2 rolling pin has a few different features that I really like, but mainly it has these size guides that come with it. This is something that's usually sold separately with rolling pins. So again, if you're just getting started, or if you have trouble rolling your dough out to the consistent width, you can just add these onto the end, whatever your recipe advises, 1/8 of an inch, and you can be pretty certain that you've rolled everything to a very uniform thickness. So I'm actually gonna grab my dough. So in this recipe, we're rolling it out just kind of into a big rectangle because we're gonna cut lattice strips to fit our 9x13 pan. But again, this has guides all along the side too. It kind of helps to make sure that you're getting an even width and things like that. This also enables you to not have to use a ton of flour. And you'll see that in so many recipes, it'll say using a light dusting only or just as much flour is needed, because we don't want to incorporate too much flour into the dough in the process of rolling. So a nice nonstick mat like this really helps you use less. Once we've got it rolled out to our desired thickness, we're gonna go ahead and cut it into strips. When you're cutting a lattice, you can do a lot of different widths and thicknesses. Today, I'm going with about 1 inch wide strips. I'm using a pastry wheel. Now, this is my favorite pastry wheel that exists because it has a fluted side and a straight side. So if you wanna do fluted, pretty crimped lattice strips, or if you wanna do straight-sided ones, you have the option for both. If you've ever watched me talk about pie before, you will know that I love my kitchen shears. I love them for pie specifically, but of course I use them for all kinds of tasks in the kitchen. And a really good sharp pair is the most important. My favorite brand is Joyce Chen. These scissors are incredible. They're really, really sharp, and it's really like an extension of your hand to let you get in for fine detail work, like trimming the edges of these lattice to fit firmly in the pan. Okay, I'm gonna grab that pan out of the refrigerator and we'll start weaving our lattice. I'm gonna go ahead and brush some egg wash on the surface of the crust, and that's a great opportunity to talk about a good pastry brush. There are both pastry brushes with natural bristles and also silicone bristles. A lot of people prefer the natural bristles, but I don't like how they have the potential to come off in your food, and you often don't notice it until it's too late. I really like the silicone brushes. They're also easier to clean, so it's always good to look for a brush with different thickness of, what would you call the thistles when they're silicone? The brush hairs, the bristles, that's it, the bristles. I have a few different widths of bristles at home. So I have some that are a little bit thinner, and that gives you a little more gentle coverage that's a little bit more similar to a natural hair pastry brush. So you can kind of look for different types, and again, there's no one right tool, it's whatever works for you. If it took you a while to weave your lattice, you might want to pop your whole pan into the refrigerator, give it a little bit of a chill before you bake it. I'm going to do a little sugar on top too. After we get this in the oven, we're going to talk about a few of the items in our Baker on the Rise kit that we didn't use in this recipe that I still think you should know about. All right, one of the next tools I want to talk about is a really good serrated knife. There's a few things I like to recommend you look for when you're looking for a serrated knife for baking. A long serrated knife is particularly nice. So this is great for cutting cake layers, really for all kinds of things. And it's always nice to be able to get your blade across the entire surface of what you're trying to cut. So this is my favorite serrated knife. I've had it for a few years. I am just obsessed with it. It's still very sharp. But another important thing to remember is that it's not as easy to sharpen serrated knives as it is your other knives at home. So serrated knives might need replacing in your kitchen more often. I'm gonna trim off the edges of this with my serrated knife first, and I'm gonna cut these into bars. This is what we call a Faki snack. There you go, Faki. So we've talked a lot about a few different types of spatulas, but one of my other favorite types of spatulas isn't even one you would normally use in baking. I love a fish spatula. This is a wider, more flexible spatula, just like an offset is, but it has a wider surface area, which makes it easier to move larger pieces of pastry. Like even in this case, before I cut these bars into bars, I can very easily pick up this entire strip of the bar. So a fish spatula just gives you a lot more control. For bakers of any level, I think it's a really useful tool. So just remember, it's not that you need all of these things or you need them all at once, but it's a great way to slowly build your collection. I cannot wait to eat this. It's like flaky layers, crumbly streusel, and jam. You gotta be kidding me. A few more things we didn't use in this recipe that I think are great for the Baker on the Rise. A really high quality digital thermometer. Now in our candy episode, we talked about a different kind of digital thermometer that I also use all the time. That one is also amazing because it has a timer built into it, perfect for a baker. This is another kind I like. This is the ThermaPen, and I actually use this particular thermometer for taking the internal temperature of things like bread. A lot of recipes say things like, bake until done, but certain things like bread are really difficult to determine the doneness. An internal temperature, just like if you're cooking a piece of meat, is the most accurate way to ensure that your bread is cooked all the way through. It's a great tool for bakers for everything from cooking sugar to determining the doneness. I also love a microplane. Microplanes are an amazing tool for getting zest or finely grinding spices like nutmeg. My favorite set is a set that comes with a larger one like this for citrus and also a miniature one that you can use for fresh nutmeg. In this recipe, I say you can optionally serve these with a dollop of whipped cream on top, but you could also just finish them with a sifting of powdered sugar. For more on sifters and sieves, here is Abina.
I think I need to. Again, I feel like I keep hammering in on this tone about baking being all about precision, but once again, the sieve or sifter, however you want to pronounce it, is the perfect tool for that. It's a really nice way to ensure that all your dry ingredients come together. For instance, anytime I'm baking anything that involves dry and wet ingredients, I mix all my dry ingredients into the sifter so that I get a nice, even pour into my bakes. It just makes it easier to mix everything together in a nice cohesion. Also, it's not just a functional tool, it's a fashionable tool as well. Once you've, finished making that beautiful chocolate cake and you want to get that icing sugar on top, what better way to do it than using your sifter or sieve?
Now, for the baker on the rise who wants to add to their pan collection, here's the next stage that I think you should consider. A good muffin pan. I like non-stick pans. At home, I have both a standard size muffin pan and mini muffin pans, but the standard size will be more versatile because you can also use it for things like mini tarts. The other thing I would recommend adding when you're a baker on the rise are round cake pans. You can kind of choose the size that's best for you. 8 or 9-inch round pans, 20 or 23 centimeters, are going to be the standard that a lot of cake recipes are written for. Now, I recommend buying at least 2 of these round pans, but if you have the cabinet space, 3 is also a great choice. Just gives you the flexibility to be able to do 2-layer, 4-layer, or 3-layer cakes. Because you can cut 2 layers into 4. You know what I'm saying. It gives you more flexibility because sometimes recipes call for 3 cake pans, sometimes they call for 2. All right, so we need to get that one B-roll shot before lunch, and then we're really gonna break for lunch, guys. There's just this one B-roll shot of a finished baked good that we need to get. It's just you, we're just filming this for you. So it says fragile, important, careful, super important.
Wait.
It's just for your camera.
Just for your camera.
That should, oh.
Ah! Happy birthday, Foggy!
Thank you, guys.
Happy birthday, Foggy!
Thank you.
As a budding baker, you may not need to invest in an electric mixer, but as a baker on the rise, I think it's officially time. So I want to talk a little bit about my favorite hand mixer, which is a more economical option if you're not sure you can invest in an electric stand mixer yet. This is my favorite hand mixer. It's my favorite for a few different reasons, but the main reason is that it has as powerful of a motor as kind of a standard stand mixer. So this is a really, really powerful little machine. I also like that it doesn't have any exposed vents because a lot of hand mixers have vents to help cool the motor down, but then flour and stuff gets into those vents. It can be a real disaster. The other thing that I really love about this particular mixer is that it comes with a different set of attachments. It actually also comes with a dough hook attachment. There should be 2 of them, but I'm not gonna lie. This morning I could only find 1. I wanted to show it to you anyway because it's pretty amazing to have a hand mixer that understands that different types of batters and doughs mix differently. And this is an example of that. So this is a really great hand mixer if you're looking for a lower cost investment. I'm gonna use it to make a little bit of cream cheese icing. No, I'm not, because I never asked anyone to plug it in. Same problem as this last episode. No, it's
not
back.
plugged
It's on. No, it's on backwards.
No, it's not plugged in.
Oh. This is actually the lowest setting on this mixer, so that just gives you a sense of exactly how powerful it really can be. This is a powerful mixer, okay? I love it. We're gonna use this as a filling in a cake. One of the things with hand mixers why they're often not as popular as the electric stand mixer is because when you're mixing a lot of stuff, your hand and wrist really will get tired eventually. But because when you have a more powerful motor, things are going to mix together a lot quicker. And that's kind of the main goal. If we wanted to get a wrist workout, we would just use a whisk, am I right? All right, this icing is just about done, but I want to throw it over to Abina to talk about an electric stand mixer.
Can I just pet it? Yes. My precious. The KitchenAid stand mixer. I think this is what separates bakers from bakers. This gadget has transformed my life completely. It whips your cookie dough way faster. You can make icing in no time. But I think what's also more special about the KitchenAid stand mixer is the attachments that you can add on here. You can use the pasta one to laminate some dough. You can spiralize vegetables for a really nice galette. There are tons of options. There are tons that you can find on eBay or on your Facebook Marketplace. But also just getting your own and really taking care of it can last a while. Like my parents have had a KitchenAid that's lasted them 2 or 3 decades. And I'm hoping that my KitchenAid will last as long too.
If you don't identify as a budding baker or a baker on the rise, you might be ready to bake it up lots of notches, which is our final kit that we're gonna talk about. When it comes to all these more advanced tools, it's really more about the frequency with which you'll use them. It's not necessarily that these tools are more expensive or more difficult to use. You just might use them less frequently, so it's the kind of thing that you can invest in once you're baking more often. That's my logic here. And we're gonna make a lovely wintry cake together while we talk about some of these tools. This is a delicious 2-layer cinnamon cake. It's gonna have a cream cheese filling in the middle, and then we're gonna frost it with some meringue, which you know we're gonna toast, obviously. So let's get started. Of course, we'll talk about my favorite tool, the torch. But first, oops, I forgot something. First, I wanna talk about this lovely tool, a scoop. You might already have a regular ice cream scoop in your home, but these portioning scoops come in lots of different sizes, and they are really great for lots of things. I'm gonna use it to portion an even layer of frosting on this cake, and for more on why they're so wonderful, let's go to Abina.
Cookie scoops. As you become more advanced of a baker, there are little ways that you wanna find precision in all the things that you're making. I find that cookie scoops are the perfect accessory for that. They're super great for making sure that you get the perfect yield for a cookie recipe, but they're also super great for portioning. For instance, you can use them to scoop icing onto a cake once you're starting to swirl and get that beautiful icing layer on there. They're also really great for muffins or brownies or scones or any of those other things where you just want to make sure that you're getting even batches all across.
All right, now let's talk about a couple other tools that I use all the time, but are definitely kind of extras. The first is specialized shapes and sizes of parchment paper. And I'm mentioning that as I put this cake upside down onto, as I'm building my layer cake, because I lined the baking pan with a 9-inch parchment round. I like to purchase these parchment rounds because I bake cakes so often that cutting them out of the other parchment that I have just takes a lot of time. I also have these lovely 5-inch parchment squares, which make a great makeshift muffin or cupcake liner in a pinch. So there's lots of great things you can do when you have some of those extra shapes of parchment. And now, as I'm frosting this cake just a little bit to even out the sides, we can talk about another favorite tool of mine, the turntable. I love a cake turntable for so many reasons, but the biggest one is just that it makes the job of cake decorating so much easier. By being able to rotate the cake smoothly like this, it's gonna allow us to get a smooth finish if we want, and most importantly, it's gonna allow us to get even coverage in lots of ways. It can take a little bit of practice to get the hang of this, but once you do, you just can't ever decorate a cake without it again. In the meantime, if you don't have a turntable and you love decorating cakes, you can always put it on a platter or cake stand and just turn it manually, which it's not as smooth, but it still works well. Another thing you're gonna notice is that I am decorating my cake on top of a cake circle made of cardboard. This is the cake circle to which I'm referring to. These circles come in lots of different sizes and even in some different shapes. I called them a cake circle, but of course they make square and rectangular ones as well. One of the questions I am asked the most often is, how do you remove the cake from the turntable onto whatever you're serving it on? And the answer is a cake circle. But having something underneath it to support, all I have to do when it's time to move that cake is nudge my spatula under just enough to lift up that circle, and then I can slide my whole hand under. Easy peasy. Now, typically, you would use a cake circle that was the same size as the cake you were decorating, and you can even use that as your frosting by holding your spatula up right flush with the cake circle to ensure that you're getting an even layer up and down on your cake. Today, I'm using a slightly larger one, only because I'm planning to transfer this later, but it still gives me that same kind of support in the meantime. Another non-disposable tool that can really help out is this. Ooh, I love this thing. You can tell I love it because it's even dented because I've loved it so much. But this is an incredible, giant, flexible spatula. So again, the idea is that something like this can slide fully under the cardboard itself or even fully under the cake itself to lift it right off the cardboard. So this is something I started using in food styling because I needed, to get under very delicate things and move them around the set and all sorts of things. But really, it's such a great tool for bakers at home because it just gives you support. You don't have to question whether or not anything is going on under there. And it gives you that same flexibility of a fish spatula or an offset spatula. And that's really one of the most wonderful things when you're using a spatula like this. I'm gonna frost some of this by hand, but I'm also gonna enlist the help of a piping bag and tip to do a little extra decor when I'm done. We talked a little bit about pastry bags and piping tips at Bake Deco, but I'm gonna throw it to Abina to talk more about why we both love this tool.
Piping bags and piping tips. I don't know how it's possible, but using these always makes me pretend I'm some artisanal French baker with my beautiful storefront in some Parisian neighborhood, but in reality, I'm in my hot and small apartment kitchen. And I know the first thing that comes to mind is, piping bags are just for icing, but they're so much more. Again, they're one of these few things that can make you a really precise baker and make your job so much easier. They're great for eclairs, pâté au choux. If you're starting a croquembouche, just perfect for all those sorts of things. And they're also really great for little gruyères as well. And again, I know if you're a more environmentally conscious baker, you're thinking there's just so much plastic. But they're actually really great reusable bags that you can use. All you want to do is just, once you're done, flip them inside out, just wash them, and then you've got a new set as well.
This is what you can do when you become a truly fearless baker. Not even using the big spatula. What? Whoosh. Now that we've piped a little extra flair onto this toasty cinnamon cake, I'm going to use a tool I've already talked about lots on Bake It Up a Notch, cut to clip.
I love fire. Can't stop, won't stop, lighting things on fire.
Okay, this is a kitchen torch. Now, I don't get my kitchen torch at a kitchen supply store. I get it from the hardware store. I think this is a better torch with a little more control, but of course at your standard kitchen supply stores, they also have much smaller, a little bit easier to maneuver versions of these. But I like the power, Faki. Be afraid. No, don't be afraid. It's wonderful. I love fire. Let's do this. Even if after my little pep talk, you're not so sure about moving cakes off of the turntable and onto a stand, you can always check out this, which is sort of both a stand and a turntable. And I have one of these and I love it so much because you can just kind of finish your cake right on the stand, get that advantage of being able to maneuver it easily, but then just take it right to the table. I don't know why I'm walking away. We have more things to talk about. So once you're ready to bake it up lots of notches, I would also recommend a good quality food processor. A food processor is great for so many things, and here's Abina with more.
The food processor. You're probably asking why another fancy big machine, but this fancy big machine actually has a lot more power than presumed. I think the food processor is one of the great assets for one bowl baking or one bowl mixing. I think particularly when it comes to biscuit and pie doughs, I simply throw everything in here, let it do its thing, pour a little liquid in there, and there you have perfectly precise dough each time. Especially if you're someone that has really warm hands and you find that your dough is melting as you're whisking or baking, putting in the food processor will guarantee that your butter or whatever fat you're using stays in crispy as well. It's also a great asset for just a lot of those flavorful things that you want to add to bakes, like nut butters, marzipan. If you wanted to chop up some vegetables or some fruits for something, for a nice like pie dough or a nice biscuit or a nice cookie or any of those types of things. So definitely a great tool. And again, they're super affordable. You can look at garage sales, eBay, Facebook Marketplace, or I personally love the Cuisinart. If you're investing in it, it's gonna last forever. It's just a great tool to have overall.
A special tool that I just got recently that I didn't even know I needed is this fantastic spatula. This is a reduction spatula. It's actually a product created by one of my mentors, Rosalie V. Berenbaum, which is how I got a sneak peek at it. But it is the coolest thing. A lot of recipes call for you to add liquid to a pot and then boil it until it reduces. And usually those recipes just say boil until it reduces by half or boil until it reduces by a third. Well, this reduction spatula is designed with notches and marks. So when you start cooking something, you can put it into the pot and note the level. Then if you have to reduce it by half, you know you just need to go to halfway down to the next notch. So this is really a lovely spatula. In addition, it's also very flexible. And since it's so skinny, I like to use it sometimes for scraping out bottles and things that are a little bit harder to maneuver around in. Reduction spatula. Another thing I'd recommend looking into is a set of cutters. Now these pastry cutters, this is a round set. They also come in fluted sets, square. They're great for using just as simple cookie cutters, but of course you can also use them to help maybe cut individual tiny crusts to make tiny pies or tarts. Lots of different portioning things that are really, really useful. You can also use them as a guide. Sometimes I'll put these on parchment paper and trace around them to know how big to pipe my pâte à choux or my macaron. So you'll see me using these in so many different episodes of Bake It Up a Notch that I think you should have them too. Another really cool tool that I love is this adjustable measuring cup. I didn't get one of these for a long time because I had lots of heat-safe measuring cups, and most of these adjustable measuring cups are plastic, but they're really amazing because you can adjust them to the exact size that you need, and then you can just push the ingredient out and scrape cleanly to get all of that out of the mixer. It's especially great for ingredients like honey, maple syrup, corn syrup, things like that. Another thing you can consider once you're ready to bake it up lots of notches are hyper-specific tools. One that I can't live without is a cherry pitter because I love to make cherry desserts. Cherry pie is one of my husband's favorites. And if you've ever pitted a bunch of cherries by hand, you'll know the cherry pitter is definitely worth the investment. Another tool we talked about when we were at Bake Deco is a spider. I love to use a spider in different frying and boiling applications. Once you're ready to expand your pan collection, here are the ones that I think you should consider. I love a bundt pan for obvious reasons. They're effortless and easy to use, and they always look great. But I also love a tube pan. A tube pan is a straight-sided, flat-topped bundt pan. It's often what you would use for something like angel food cake. My favorite springform pan comes from a brand called Fat Daddy-O's, and it actually wraps around the base of the pan to make totally straight sides. I used it to make my 3-tiered Thanksgiving pie here on Food 52. I listed pie plate in the most basic because you guys know how I feel about pie. But of course, when you're ready to expand your collection, it's also great to get a tart pan. Tart pans and pie plates are different because of the depth. Tart pans also often have fluted sides. At home, I have tart pans in a lot of different shapes and sizes. I like individual ones, I have a long rectangular one, but a standard size for home use would be 11 or 12-inch round. A Pullman loaf pan is a straight-sided, perfectly square loaf pan used to make a certain type of bread, like sandwich bread, so that the whole loaf is very square. It also has a lid on the top, which helps keep the surface of the loaf from doming over the edge of the pan. If you've ever bought a baking sheet at a standard home store, you might actually have purchased a jelly roll pan. Jelly roll pans are slightly different dimensions than a standard half sheet tray, and they're used specifically for making roulades. We use them all over our roulade episode of Bake It Up a Notch.
I met Erin in 2020 of June when I started my small Instagram account during the pandemic as a means to share all my tips and tricks. It was during the summer when the Black Lives Matter protests were really prominent and I wasn't seeing much of the food community supporting. And so I reached out to Erin because I had been following her for years and she always responded to my DMs when I asked her about pie stuff. And I asked, hey, do you happen to know 5 Black bakers that you want to share just to spread the love and show some support to the community at this time? And she said yes, and she shared it with a bunch of other people. And in turn, it's brought me a lot of joy and incredible opportunities, but it's also brought me an incredible friend in Erin. So that's how we met.
Thank you for being a friend.
Oh,
Thank you for coming.
thank you for having me. This is so good.
Normally in Bake It Up a Notch, we talk a lot about where mistakes can happen, but there's really no mistakes that can happen here. Tools like these are extremely personal, so hopefully you like these recommendations, but if not, I'm sure you'll find the tool that's just right for you. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Bake It Up a Notch, where we talked all things equipment. I really hope this was an informative episode for you, and I hope it inspires you to bake. As a reminder, all of these delicious recipes are available on food52.com, and they are linked in the video description below. If this does inspire you to bake, please, please, please use hashtag Bake It Up a Notch. We'd love to see what you're cooking up. Why did I say cooking? I meant baking. Be sure to come back in 2 weeks, where our next bite-size episode is going to be all about getting to know your oven. And until then, happy baking.
In the guitar playing